Myself right now, and I almost said good morning, but it's not morning, it's afternoon. So, good afternoon to you, and welcome to the inflection point moment. As you can see, I am by myself right now, but Jeff's going to be coming on in just a few minutes. Today, we are talking about emotional intelligence again, and our question is, are you ready to tip the scale in your favor? I mean, who doesn't want the scale tipped in their favor? In order to do that, you need to be aware of what it is that's going to tip the scales in your favor. Because for many leaders and entrepreneurs, they're out there just scratching out a living and holding on by their fingernails to their business. But what if there were things that you could do that could help to tip the scale in your favor and move you from just scratching out a living in your small business to being to thriving as the owner of your business that's growing? Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm still fighting that crazy cold stuff. So what Jeff and I are going to talk about when Jeff gets on with me is how using emotional intelligence can help you to create alignment around your business why that then can motivate your team to achieve your company's vision. Because, see, this has to do with knowing that it's not the data that's going to keep people engaged, but it's the story. Yeah, I know. Oh, and here's Jeff, and he's going to join me. So I'm going to stop for a second and bring him on with me. Hey, Jeff. Maybe.
Maybe. Oh, there you go. There's a little bit of delay on audio.
Oh, that makes life more interesting.
Yep.
That'll give us some fun for the day to day. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I started talking to everybody because you're coming on live with me. So, like no funny faces, no crazy stories. You didn't get to do that before we started today.
I know. I thought about it. I saw that I was backstage and only you could see and hear me. And I thought about starting to make funny faces, but a thing said, you can be added at any time. So mute. So it prompted me not to do those things.
I know that was killing you, but here we are.
Yes.
So, what I was talking about when you came into the backstage is that it's not the data that keeps people on your team engaged. It's the story, it's the connection to the vision and the why of the company that's what keeps them going and motivated, that intrinsic motivation that keeps people plugged in to what it is that we're doing. And that by knowing that and being able to tap into that, because that's emotional. Story is always related to emotion, right?
Yeah.
That's what tips the scale in our favor as a leader, as a business owner, in any relationship that we're in. What keeps us connected and in the story is the why, the emotional connection to the person, to the organization. So, while data is certainly important and we need data, story is what is going to keep us going when the chips are down or when the chips are up. I mean, if things are going well and there's a story that relates to that, let's stay with it and keep moving forward. But
Absolutely.
there's also the really key thing of knowing that why, knowing that story behind things when the chips are down and it's challenging and you don't know where you're going to go next. I remember a story you told me. Gosh, it's probably been a year and a half ago now. I'm guesstimating on the time frame, but you were talking to a client, and actually, I think the part of the way the story went was we were supposed to be getting on to do an inflection point moment. So that means it was probably about a year ago. And you couldn't join me because your client was having some really challenging times and things were just really hard. And the client was in tears And so you couldn't just go, sorry, I need to go get on this live stream. You had to stay there in the moment with the client because things were really hard in that moment. So the story at that point was hard, but the why that the client had was that's why they were having that's why they were having this challenge and really feeling the deep emotion and frustration about it that was driving the tears was because that their why was so important and they didn't want to let go of it. So I'm going to let you expand on that a little bit because I've just like set the table. So now you can kind of talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, and I think that really ties to, tipping the scale in your favor as a business owner. There was some challenges going on in the business, I think, and the owner um, was feeling those,
As
challenges.
owners will.
Yes, both operationally and just in general in the business. Um, and really, a lot of the discussion on that was, how do we share some of what's going on with the team, not to make them overly concerned or worried, but kind of help share with where things are at and the why behind why certain decisions were being made and where the business was headed, and making sure that we kind of teed up what some of that why was behind the scenes, why there were certain decisions that were being made in the business,
Uh-huh.
to make sure that we kept the staff and team really engaged in the mission of the business still, which is
Absolutely.
the same mission, but the manner in which that was being achieved was going to have to change. A lot of that was based on for this particular client market conditions and things that were going on in their industry, which I'm sure is not a surprise to anyone that's been around a while. There's a lot
Hello. Yeah,
going on in the market right now.
absolutely. Hmm.
Really, a lot of what that was about, and in that particular moment, while the live stream is very important to me, it wasn't the most important thing in that moment, which is why I was not present probably about a year ago, and trying to just help work through some of that and some of the messaging and taking some of the emotional aspect of that out. Looking at that very objectively from just a business and results perspective, and how does that tie into the broader messaging and communications that needed to be done for the team.
That's really interesting that you say that, Jeff, because you just said taking the emotions out of it. And we're talking about leveraging emotions. And so recognizing where and when the emotion component, for lack of a better description, is inserted into what we're doing is really critical. And actually, interesting that you say that because next month we're going to talk about how we identify the emotions and regulate them so that we are not in an emotional flood and unable to see the way forward because identifying our emotions is important.
Yeah.
But as you were talking about in this situation, in this business situation, being able to manage the emotions and tap into them in a positive way as opposed to being overwhelmed by them is really critical. And those tears of the business owner were an indicator. And just for the record, a guy could have tears just as much as a girl could. Excuse me. A man could just as much as a woman could as a business owner. I
Yeah.
mean, the emotional roller coaster sometimes of being a business owner can be tear inducing regardless of who you are. Excuse me. That being said, those tears are an indicator that there are emotions at least underneath the surface, if not surfacing, and you're being able to be that calming voice to help manage the emotions effectively is so critical.
Yeah. And sometimes, where I said take the emotion out of it, sometimes when you've got, um, uh, what might seem as for you, whatever this means for your business, a tough business decision, sometimes those emotions can cloud objective
Mhm.
decision making on what really needs to be done that's best for the business and the organization, which may be in direct conflict with what's best for your employees. Right. So sometimes that can be a really emotional thing where taking some of that emotion out is beneficial, to make a really solid objective based on the fact pattern that you're facing,
Wait, data
but
you mean?
being able to put in some of that emotion back
Yes.
into the discussion and the why is completely okay. But, sometimes you see where that emotional aspects of decision making can take you down maybe not the best path for the future of your business, because you're thinking more with the emotional hat versus the objective facts and numbers hat, that sometimes those things don't align. It doesn't mean that you have to be completely not emotional and not lead your team, authentically, and that you cover that stuff up. But, sometimes as an owner, when you're kind of on your own making those decisions, taking off that emotional hat so that you can really look at the facts and figures in front of you can make a huge difference.
Yeah, right. This is where emotional regulation would come into the would come into the picture, I guess is the best way to phrase that, because you have to be able, you can't be driven by your emotions. Your emotions are not good or bad, your emotions just are. You have to acknowledge they're there, because if you don't acknowledge they're there, they will come out sideways, and that's always an ugly situation.
It's never
Sideways is not good. However, knowing how to say, okay, wow, I could just really freak out about this, but that's not going to get us anywhere. Now, figure out the how do we figure out the components of this that we need to be looking at, and so that we can make intelligent decisions that are smart for the business, that drive off the why, and help us to know what we do and how we do it in this situation as effectively as possible.
Yeah, that is exactly what all this is about, right? It's a balancing between all of these
Yeah,
things.
absolutely. And so this is what's really interesting about this is, as I sat down to think about it this morning, is it really drives off of Simon Sinek's golden golden triangle, which is your why is the basis of everything, and then the how comes out of that, and then the what is the thing on the top. What people usually see is the what. They know the what. It's very obvious what your what is. What is the product you are delivering? That's the what. How is how you deliver the product. But why is a lot of times not so obvious. So if we were thinking about a product in the marketplace, we could identify what the product is, because obviously it's a product. I mean, okay, let's use a cell phone. We know this is what. And the how is, well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of hows to how you get a cell phone. You could get a cell phone from your provider. You could go buy the cell phone by itself and then hook it up to the provider. There's all kinds of ways that the how can happen.
Yeah.
But the why, this happens to be an iPhone. So the why beyond the iPhone, from a product perspective, is they wanted something to be beautiful and functional that would connect people to each other. that is the really short version of the Steve Jobs thing, you know.
Yeah. The very shortened version.
Yeah, it's a lot shortened. But there is a why behind every product and every service that's out there in the marketplace. The key to understanding that is going to some deep stuff that it's not super obvious. And that's one of the reasons why it's important that you communicate that to your team, because you want to attract the people to you who have the same why that you do. That's one of the things that keeps your team connected in.
Yeah.
And as we both know from being in big corporations, that the larger the company, the more challenging it is to have people stay connected to the why of this major corporation. Because, I mean, if you've got thousands and thousands of people, staying connected to the why is much more challenging. It gets so diluted.
Yeah.
And the motivation of a paycheck is a motivation, but it's nothing like the motivation of believing in the why of that company. Just saying.
You are very, very true. Right. And then oftentimes, I think in larger organizations, depending upon the role that you play, if you're not directly tied into customers, you get further removed from what actually maybe that why or that product or service, what it actually does, right? You can hear about it in a marketing message or whatever, but if you're not witnessing it and seeing it,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah,
know, it's difficult to stay connected to, or can be difficult to stay connected to.
you're right. And you know, that is very true. When you are not customer facing, when you're in a support role that is far from that, as you just said, it's much more difficult to stay connected to that. And so that requires the leaders of that segment of the organization to help people understand why what they're doing is an important role within the larger why of the organization.
Yeah.
Some people are better at that than others. Let's just phrase it that way.
Yeah. Putting it nicely.
Yes. I mean, that's just a statement of fact. There are some people who are very who it's easy for them to tap into that emotional connection and help people see their role in relationship to the larger organization's why.
Yeah.
In a small company, though, the why of the organization should be easier for people to see their connection to. Should be. But the key here is that the owner, the founder, needs to be able to verbalize it.
Yeah. And that's where, that stuff becomes, I think, really, really important, um, for the owner to be able to communicate that
Yeah.
and do it in an authentic way. I mean, I don't know any business owner that exists not to make money.
That's kind of defeating the purpose.
Yeah, but beyond that, and really going deeper beyond that on what is the why, and not just the why for you as the business owner or your family, but the why for, the customers, and why your employees choose to work in your organization. There's, a bunch of places they could work. What is it about you,
Right.
why they choose to work there?
Exactly. Exactly.
I'd say deeper than a paycheck, because pay, while it can be a motivator, I would say that big pay in the long term doesn't alone keep people with your organization. I've known people that have walked away, from very big pays and things to go somewhere and make less money but be happier
Yes.
for a multitude of reasons.
And and that really drives to the the challenges that we've seen in the last several years, I mean, throughout the pandemic and let's just call it the after effects of the pandemic, with people quiet quitting, with the great reset, great resignation, all those are words that were connected to the word great.
Yep.
Um, Part of that was because people all of a sudden started recognizing it's not just about the paycheck. I need something more to connect me in to whatever company I'm part of. And if you are somebody who can give your people a why that they're connected to, not just that it's your why. I mean, the why of I want to make big bucks, so therefore you should come work for me is not going to connect with them. However, I want to build spaces for families where they can feel at home and always be comfortable in the space. That could that could be something where you have a construction company that does that, and people say I want to work for that construction company because I know that the people they're building for, that they're central to them, and the way they approach it is the way I want to approach my work. So, craftsmanship is really important. And we do quality work here, and everybody that works with us is people who does quality work. Well, don't we want to be part of that? Yeah. So, um, that was a funny sound.
Yeah. Apparently, I've got some text messages coming in.
Apparently, you do. So, go ahead.
No, all good. I was trying to silence those.
Oh, okay. So that is the way to tip the scale in your favor and keep your team connected, even in those hard times, even when, as you were talking about with this client that I just, totally drew you into. And let's talk about that client experience. You don't have to thank me for not warning you about that. Um, when you, even when things are hard, if your team knows what the why is, knows that intrinsic motivator and the story that goes with it, that they're connected to, then they'll work with you through those hard times and doing things differently, and maybe having to everybody in the organization has to take a pay cut in the short term because we got to figure out a way to stay afloat, and we'll we'll do our best to come back to the level we were at. But right now we have two choices: we can go under, or we can all try to work through this together.
Yeah.
And that's a time where there's emotion involved with it, but you have to set the emotion aside in order to figure out the way through.
Yeah. Kind of what's that flight path to
Yeah,
get through kind of this rough patch, and what do
exactly.
we do?
Right. And actually, I'm thinking about setting aside the emotions. You have to set aside the emotions of things like panic and dread, and find the emotions of determination. And we're going to get this done
Yeah.
together. We are committed. Determination and commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, switch which emotions you're focused on, because you can make the decision to do that. And that's part of this, making a decision to thrive regardless of the situation. So, as I kind of alluded to in the beginning, we're moving out of the general emotional intelligence space. And in the month of May, we're going to focus on the first component of emotional intelligence, which is emotional self-awareness. And the bucket we're talking about is learning to identify and manage our emotions, how that benefits yourself, your team, and your personal life, like your family, your friends, your neighbors, because being able to identify the emotions that you're experiencing is gold as far as knowing how to move forward and not letting them come out sideways.
Yeah.
Because that's just really not a good idea. Sideways emotions are destructive.
Yeah. Can be very destructive.
Yes, they can be that. So, next week, we're going to talk about recognizing and naming your emotions and why that's important. It's going to be a little bit different, but we're going to go beyond mad, glad, and sad. How's that?
A lot deeper.
Oh,
Would nice be one of those?
that's not a nice thing to say.
For anyone that wasn't on, what was that a couple weeks ago? Rhonda does not care for the word nice as kind
No.
of descriptor. So I decided I'd just throw that in there.
Thanks, Jeff. You're too kind for words. Yeah. But kind is a much better word than nice.
That
Because
is very true.
kind communicates more effectively what you're doing than nice. Nice is too squishy.
Yeah.
Which I said the other day. So we don't need to go down that road again.
Yeah.
I know you're trying to get me to go down that road
We'll
again.
get on that soapbox. Although I just did kind of notice something. Usually when we're on earlier, we kind of like adjust cameras. I look like I'm sitting at the kids' Thanksgiving table for some reason. There we go.
Thank you. I feel better now because I really don't want to be by myself at the adult table. I would rather
Like,
have us both be at the same table.
it's like, I don't know why. It looks like Rhonda's at the adult table and I'm at the kids' table. Like, why am I sitting so much lower? And usually this is stuff that we do kind of pre-going live where, I'll make adjustments on that. But now we're about the same height.
And I can't adjust. I mean, I am where I am. It is what it is. I don't have all that fancy stuff.
Yeah.
I just have a chair and a camera. Here we
are. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, it's been great having this conversation with you. I hope people are ready to tip the scale in their favor and understand that emotion and story are critical to being able to keep their team connected in and use that emotional intelligence for the benefit of their organization and all the stakeholders in it. So we'll be back next week.
Yeah.
To talk about recognizing and naming our emotions and how that benefits you as a business owner.
Yeah.
It's not just squishy stuff. It's beneficial.
I'm going to say that, not just squishy stuff. There is a business benefit to that.
Absolutely. Okay. So from the adult table, we'll see you next week.
Yeah. See you next week.